start recording this session because it had just been essentially a one-to-one chat. I didn't want it to be recorded, but now I've got a crowd of you. This is fabulous. This is why I don't set up waiting rooms. Otherwise, I may never have noticed that you were all here. So if it's all right with you, David, I'm going to go back to where I started. And as I say, you can engage or not as you go through. Goodness, we've gone a fair way through, actually. So here is where I would come in. Actually, before we do that, I do want to acknowledge the Turrbal and the Yagara people and the lands in which QUT now stands, knowing that these lands have always been places of teaching, learning and research, and we welcome all contributions from First Nations people in this workshop. What I would like to get through today, in a disjointed way for David, but in a quite consecutive way for most of you, is why we'd engage on careers with our HDRs, when to do that, and how. And I want to give you a bunch of resources to make sure that it's as easy as possible for you. And then a couple of things for you to do, which you may have overheard as we went through, that gives you some really good activities to do with your students without you having to find those resources. So first of all, why is this important? Most of you are pretty familiar these days with the ACOLA report of 2016, which says that less than 25% of graduate researchers work in academic positions. 5% will end up in professorial roles. So it used to be, we were chatting earlier about taking almost an apprenticeship view of a PhD and originally the PhD was almost an apprenticeship for an academic career. This is no longer the case. What we need supervisors to do is get on board and let our students know that it's not a second choice, a less preferable option to work in industry. Yvonne actually runs the most fabulous workshop called PhD Plan B for us in HDR Careers Week every year. It's a fabulous workshop. I highly recommend it to all of your HDRs. What we talk about in that workshop is having a plan B make sure that you've considered all your options, but all of those options are equally valid. Again, why is it important for you to have these conversations? Well, it helps your GOS outcome results. It helps you, wherever your student ends up, you then get even better connected within government, within corporate environments, and with research and innovation to make sure that your teaching practice is up to date and current. And of course, these days, it's more and more important for academics to demonstrate their own industry connections. Gentry says, I can't in good conscience recommend most students consider a career in academia. It's sad, isn't it, when we found a role that we love that we can't really suggest is the most possible or the most appropriate going forward. And I can understand how you feel that way. So again, this is from the ACOLA report, and this in 2019, there was research conducted into the top PhD employers with the Nous Group and CSIRO. So actually about half of these candidates from 2019 across Australia wanted to do that. So when you recognise that if 25% of our HDRs can find work in academia and about 50% want to find work in academia, I'm terrible at maths, but even I can figure out, then we've got a gap, an expectations gap, where a quarter of our students who want to work in academia probably won't. We need to normalise this for our students without frightening them about looking elsewhere, because looking elsewhere can bring so many opportunities. I thought I'd share this slide. It will be published by the end of the year, but this is from the QUT PhD reaccreditation that happened at the beginning of this year. So we've just reaccredited our program, and these were our QUT student responses from 2022. So ultimately, what they're aiming for, we were pretty bang on previous stats. It's 49% of our students wanted an academic role or were aiming for an academic role. 6% in non-academic, but still in tertiary. 9% in government. 26% is industry, so private enterprise. 2% in not-for-profit, and 8% of those had no idea. So we're actually quite consistent with broader Australian research, but it's nice to see stats about our own cohorts for a change, I think, so that we can tailor things. For those of you who maybe aren't used to using industry, all that means is non-academia. There are no, often people may assume, or your students may assume, that's manufacturing or something like that. It's literally everything else. Third space roles are ones that I love engaging with students on, because they're things that they have never even thought of. Knowing that we have learning designers in the grad team, that we have language and learning writing educators in the grad team who are employed as academics, but they perform professional roles, can be really encouraging for students. So knowing that half our team are academically based is a good thing. And then for those of us who are not, you can still essentially do a similar role as a professional. So now that there are more of you, I am going to engage in a poll. So let's launch this. Hopefully you can see that. What's your experience with being recruited outside of academia? I'm not going to ask you what your experience is inside or outside, because I know most of you have incredibly deep experience. But in terms of recruitment, have you ever been recruited outside academia? And this is where I'd love, in the second question, again, some feedback on how would you prefer activity-based resources that you can recommend and use with your students. What's the best way for me to present them for you? All right. I'm still seeing some votes. Oh, this is fabulous. Particularly with the resource one, I know you want resources, but where are you going to find them? What is the most likely way? I'll just close that out so I can share that with you now. What's the most likely way that you would engage with them and you would find them most useful? So actually what you've asked for is, I don't want 50 different documents that I have to know what they all are. You'd like them compiled for you, either as a single document or in 3 separate documents. Maybe we do 1 document and 3 really clear chapters for you so that you know where to look. Thank you. That's really helpful. Right. It's already a work in progress. I'll put that together in the right way. and that'll be coming your way soon. One of the hardest things, the questions that I get asked a lot is, when should I be engaging with career stuff? And I'm really conscious that I don't want to contradict what you as a thesis supervisor need your students to focus on. So I guess one of the core messages is that it's never too soon to start planning, because most students start planning in the final year or the final 6 months. There are opportunities that they will miss to set themselves up well from the beginning. So, as researchers, you know that sometimes your research assumption can prove inaccurate and you need to redraft it. The same with career plans. So, if candidates don't even start planning until their final semester, there's no opportunity for them to redraft it or re experience things differently if their assumptions aren't proving workable. So, what to do and when? This is the career planning model that QUT works with. We've broken it down into before confirmation, and I'll be honest with you, I front load this. I'm asking students to do a lot of their thinking, their investigating, and their self-reflection really early before confirmation, which is hopefully before they're under a lot of pressure with you to start writing their chapters. It's to get the hang of where they're at and what they might look for. I front load it. Then there's things that they do in the middle that engages with industry and identifies more specifically what they need to do, so that by the end, in their final year, when they're madly finishing editing and writing for you, I want them to focus on that writing task. So at the end, the only thing that is still outstanding for them is how to literally do their job search, because this is the season that they're now in, how to do their job search, how to write their documents, and how to do powerful interviewing. That's the only thing I'm asking them to do in their final year. Each of these steps has now been converted into 8 self-paced online Canvas modules. So whichever stage your student is at, or whatever piece of information that they're needing more of, they are now in self-paced modules. At the beginning, you can suggest that they do all 8 if they're interested, or they can pick and choose which of these modules is the most useful for them, and there's activities in those modules. If students feel that they can then engage with you potentially and go, hey, I've done this activity, what do you think about it? That would be fabulous. But again, you don't have to lead these conversations or these resources, because you have other expertise and different demands on your time. If you know that these exist, it's easy to point your students in the right direction, knowing that I've got them sorted. So, where research degrees can be tricky for recruiters outside academia is they don't understand HDRs very well. They're intimidated by them themselves, and they may have an assumption that it's all study and no work. And we all know that that's the opposite of what's actually true. So they may need help, recruiters need help in unpacking how the research that has been done is relevant for their role. And it's this skill translation that students often struggle with. If they say, I've published 3 articles, that's not going to sell them, recommend them for a role, most likely. In fact, it will make them seem less relevant. But if they converted that and said, I've run 3 cross-disciplinary projects across a short period of time with and written a report with recommendations for initiatives for changes to practice, then industry will always be interested in that. It's about how to convert their skill set. So, how to engage with them without you having to be the expert in the room. How do you start other than saying, here's a resource, go for it? Which, to be honest, if that's as far as you go, I'm really happy with that, as long as you know where that resource is. But what are some other activities that you can engage? One of the first ones that I recommend is doing an alumni search on LinkedIn. Some academics are not on LinkedIn at all. And there's lots of reasons for that, or they're not particularly active on LinkedIn. Again, that's perfectly understandable from your perspective, but from your students' perspective, it is a critical network. You can be open to recruiters on LinkedIn before you're looking and have recruiters reach out to you. And I'm not talking about that green I'm unemployed banner, because none of your students are. They're in full-time employment with their HDR studies. But you can be discreetly open to recruiters. I do that so that I can evidence it to students. I was outreached 3 days ago by a recruiter who's saying, I've got a role that I think you might be interested in. I had a conversation with them. It's not really for me, but I didn't have to find that role. In fact, I never did find it on Seek or any of the other job boards. But if it was a role I'd been interested in, I could have achieved that role without even interviewing, which is kind of nice. Alumni searches are really powerful. Finding somebody else who's done this before you in your field is really fabulous. So one of the first things to do is look up QUT in the homepage on LinkedIn. This is what the homepage actually looks like. And you can see there's a button that says alumni. From that alumni button, you can see there's about 200,000 QUT alumni on this platform that are registered. 200,000 doesn't help anyone. What you can do is do a more targeted search for when they graduated. You might want to look at people who graduated 5 to 10 years ago. So you can set that parameter. You can find out where they're currently based, whether it's Brisbane based or Australia or internationally. You can find out what field they are working in and what type of role they have. When you put in those search parameters, 200,000 alumni can shrink into a really manageable pool of maybe 40 students or 40 graduates, I should say. And from that 40 graduates, then you can go, actually, yes, let's do a bit of professional stalking on their LinkedIn profiles. This person's had an amazing career. I would love for that career trajectory to be mine one day. I wouldn't mind reaching out and having a chat. From here, you can then message this person and say, I'm currently at QUT and I found you on an alumni search. Would you have 15 minutes to connect with me to do an informational interview? It's the least sexy workshop that I run, informational interviewing. It's hard to get people to come. It doesn't sound very interesting, but so I'm going to have to change the title. But it is one of the most powerful things that students can do. The more informational interviews they conduct, the more different perspectives, different careers, different decision-making processes they'll have access to, some of which may align with their own, so they can learn from other people's successes and failures as they go through. This is the perfect activity for introverts, for internationals who feel like they don't have a network yet. The alumni search is the perfect way around that. And for the socially awkward who don't like networking, because it's not about them at all. It's about the person that you're interviewing. It's all based on their career. So, one of my activity handouts is explaining to people how to set up informational interviewing and also the kinds of questions to ask. Often, when a student who isn't used to doing this starts off, they go, "Oh, Boeing, I'd love to work for Boeing. I'll find an alumni at Boeing and my informational interview will be, how did you get a job at Boeing? How can I get a job at Boeing? Do they have jobs available at the moment?" And that's the fastest way to alienate a potential contact because they don't work in recruitment. They don't want to have a recruitment conversation. Instead, how did you choose your career path? What other careers did you consider? Can be really powerful conversations. I've broken it down into questions on career path, person's current role, their current organization, and their skills. And I've ensured that the focus on these template conversations are all about the other person. These can be tailored, it's better if it is, obviously, tailored to that person's experience or a particular organization, but it gives you an idea of where a student can start. Only at the very end, once you've asked 3 or 4 other questions, would I suggest that they engage in the advice column? And none of those is asking for, and tell me what I should do, because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the students are experiencing. It's just about one question is, how do I get another conversation like this? Who else might you recommend? Or could you, if they've had a great conversation, would you have capacity for a further chat? And then what help haven't I asked that you think might be helpful for me? These information interviews are genuinely their secret weapon. But if you've never done it before, it's really intimidating, especially if it's essentially a cold call. So, can I ask that one of the most important things that you can do with your student is to encourage them to role play this with you? If you are the first subject that they interview, what I would suggest, whether you've always worked in academia and you think, what's the point of doing that because they already know about me, encourage them to find questions that they don't already know. For example, when did you know that academia was for you? What was it that helped cement that career plan for you? When was your light bulb moment? And what else did you consider? Why didn't you pursue those? Do you have any regrets about not pursuing those? Share your faults, your failures, the things that you didn't know about, that you didn't consider, so that they learn from the benefit of your experience, but also help them edit their questions so that they are the most useful and the least likely to alienate their contact. That's the thing that students are really afraid of. What if I burn a bridge with Boeing if I have a conversation that isn't well received by someone who works there? Help them know that their questions that they draft are strong and meaningful. So role play it with them, correct their conversations in a safe place because they already trust you. And then encourage them to ask one of these advice questions at the end. Is there anyone else in your network that I could talk to? And see if you can suggest 1 or 2 people. Not doing the work for them, not giving them the warm connection, just saying, yes, this person, reach out, see what happens. It's really, really powerful, especially coming from you. The second thing is, of course, because most people are looking at industry experience, to be able to encourage industry experiences for your students. Now, most of you are familiar with internships, and it is true that that's the most powerful way for students to get industry experience through an internship. But not everyone has that opportunity. They don't always have scope to do it. They don't always have room in their life or their program to do that. So it isn't just a, I guess, pass, fail. You did an internship, you didn't do an internship. There are degrees of industry experience. There is a spectrum, and I think it's really important for you to scaffold this for your students. Here is the spectrum. It goes from information gathering. We've just talked about informational interviewing. So just learning about different industries. I didn't even know that certain industries were interested in my kind of research or my skills. Then it's networking. When you've got exposure to networking opportunities, there's project involvement. Then there's internship participation. And of course, the gold standard of industry engagement is finding a role, whether part-time or temporary or sessional, inside an employment. So the first three of those are just enablement. This is getting the hang of what other industries are out there and what my opportunities might be. The second, or the last two, are when you literally engage. If they haven't been enabled to understand what industries exist, it's hard to engage, right? So we run separate workshops on industry internships. We can help your students go through them. The changes in the RTP funding are hopefully familiar to most of you now. But there are incentives when there's an intention of internship completed within the first 18 months. So to repeat, that's the intention of internship agreement within the first 18 months. It doesn't mean that the internship itself happens early on. It can be engaged in at any time. One other thing that I'd love for supervisors to be potentially more aware of is there are two completely different documents for students to apply within academia and outside academia. Most resumes that I see are a hybrid of the two, which means that they're not ideally matched for either one. So, what is the difference? The difference with an academic CV is it's all about your output. You know this. It's the depth of your experience, the number of publications. Because of that, they're looking for detail. They want to know who their core supervisor was, what their methodology was, what their research topic was, and how many times they've presented at conferences. No CV is too long for an academic CV, and they don't really have to tailor it. So you folk have it easy. You just need to add things to your CV. If you're looking for a new role or a promotion, you don't have to tailor anything. For a professional resume, the way I describe it to students is one, the academic CV is the whole movie. It's everything that happens. It's the whole script. In terms of industry resumes, professional resumes, this is the highlights reel. The highlights only. There's an awful lot that gets left out. Doesn't mean it's not important. It means that it's not required to get you to buy your movie ticket, because that's what the movie highlight reel is for. It's not for you to experience the movie. It's for you to buy the ticket. So its focus is on outcomes that are relevant to that organisation. It's about selling how their research skills add value to whatever it is that that organisation does. It's about quantifiable impact and results statements, maximum 2 to 3 pages. And that means that there's a huge amount of tailoring to do for every different organisation. You can start a master document and then edit certain bits, but basically this is the document that takes the most amount of work and takes the most amount of reframing. If you put publications in there, you will scare industry off, you will scare them off, you will intimidate them, and you will look less appropriate. It's about that skill conversion. So recruitment processes are also different. There are different documents that you need for roles inside academia to the ones that you need outside of academia. A statement of claims is used for government roles and some corporate roles. Selection criteria isn't usually used. Keyword searches are really important. So you need to reference, the way I explain it to students is when you're writing your key skills section, these are not the top 5 skills that you possess. They are the top 5 skills that this job requires. Even if they're your bottom set of skills, if you have those skills, they are the skills that you highlight. So understanding that a video interview is very often part of the recruitment process. Video interviews are horrible. They're often interviews without even a person. It's just a timed recording with a question that you've only just seen. And this can often be their filter, the first point of engagement with this company. They're not even talking to a human. I've done careers for 15 years. My first video interview experience, I failed. I was terrible. And I know how to do interviews. It's a whole different version. There is a QT tool called Big Interview that can help students practice what it's like to do in video interviews. I've even got a selected set of questions specifically for HDRs that help them learn how to do a timed question on tell me about your research in 2 minutes. Learning how to explain that to a layperson within 2 minutes. And I see in the comments people have referenced their 3-minute thesis experiences. It's about converting it for lay people. So where do you start? Until I build your manual and I let you know where that's going to be, where can you currently refer students to other than sending them straight to me, which you are more than welcome to do? The first place we would ask you to start is the HDR Skills Assessment tool. The recommendation is that students engage with this tool every year. Once every year, they're required to do it at the start of their program, but if they do it annually, then ideally your students will see, look at the growth that I'm experiencing in my capability in understanding what my research skills and my external skills can be. And it points them to different things that they can do to build those skills. In terms of looking for work, my first recommendation is always, it doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's Times Higher Education Uni Jobs. This is a fabulous web page because you can designate whether you're looking for academic roles, for research specific roles, or professional roles. And it's one of the safest ways that I can show students what these third space roles in professional areas can be that they may never have considered. Doing LinkedIn job searches, ethical jobs for not-for-profit roles, smart jobs for government roles, and the difference between those can be really helpful. There's hundreds, but if you've got a couple you can start recommending for your students, that would be helpful. You know where I said we've got a QT model that gives you 8 different steps to a job ready researcher? This is where they can actually step themselves through it. These are our Canvas modules. So all of these are available to all of your HDR students. If they want to work them in order, they can go 1 to 8, but they can just say, so for example, if they're interested in exploring informational interviews, because it's really exciting, then it's invest in industry experiences. They're self-paced, they're online, they don't have to take very long, and it's less content, more activities, so that they can conduct informational interviews. They can scope some of their professional questions that they'd like to know. They can use this to experiment and practice on you, and that's where you'll find that. If students are looking for ways of converting their terminology away from academic jargon and into industry jargon, it will be in defining your competitive edge. So what is it that makes you valuable? Not just because you have a piece of paper that says PhD. What is it that makes you valuable? It's all the skills that they've built in conducting their research. It's not their thesis that is the product of their PhD. It's themselves as job-ready researchers. These are the 8 modules that you'll be able to recognise and then reference. I'm probably going to skip this one because we're a bit stuck. So essentially what I want to hear is yes, it's really valuable. Why is it valuable? Because this is what industry is looking for. Industry is looking to grow their innovation, to grow their global competitiveness, and to be more productive and more efficient. So they want people to solve their complex problems. This is why researchers are ideally placed to meet that. But they have to make those two things relate. It's up to the HDR to convert what they know and explain why what they know is relevant in industry. I'd like to open the floor for conversations, for questions, for comments. We've had a lot of chat, even since the timing kerfuffle. But what I'm interested in is, what questions do you have? What questions are you faced with from your students that you don't enjoy answering? Or what do you need to know? What do I need to share with you for you to be best placed to help your students? Any specific comments, questions? If not, we'll carry on. Absolutely. I will send you these slides. I will send you resources for informational interviews to get you started so that you'll be able to recommend those modules.
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
So from when we're, the one thing that I don't have much familiarity with is kind of a referee, being a referee for your student going out, and the different kind of expectations in terms of how you act as a reference for a student. So is there kind of a list of like don'ts, like because especially our academic profession of economists, we're notoriously rough on each other, and my feeling is that's you want to kind of be very supportive, obviously, but exactly how or what they're maybe looking for might be useful, or what they're what might strike down your student without you knowing that you're striking them down, I guess.
I love that question. It's a really great question. One of the easiest ways to mess up a referral, if an organization has contacted you, is if you don't know the specifics of the position, because you may, in your attempts to sell your student, you may sabotage them unintentionally. I'll give you a really lay example. When I was working in HR, the receptionist at the organization asked me to be her referee. And I said, of course, because she was fabulous, but she was wasted as a receptionist. She was a qualified teacher. She was fabulous at workshops, and we had her answering the phones. So I was excited to be her referee so that she could get a higher quality job. So, one of the core questions that you're often asked as a referee is, what are their growth opportunities? Or was there anything, essentially, was there anything negative about working with this person that we need to know about? And I thought I had the perfect answer because I said, this person was fabulous. The only thing that I can contribute into that question is that we wasted their skill. They were overqualified, so they ripped through their tasks. And so they were capable of so much more. So I'm really happy to endorse them for a higher level role. What she didn't tell me was that she had applied for another role as a receptionist. And that's pretty much the only thing I could have said. That was terrible. And so, with the best of intentions, I've messed that up. So, that is one thing that I would strongly recommend that your HDR tells you is I ask students always, have you asked whether your referee wants to be your referee? Sometimes they put managers or supervisors down because they just think that that's required. It's not required. So they need to check, are you willing to be a referee? Then, if they are sending an organization to you, you need to know what you are referring them to. So, ideally, sending them the position description or asking them to have a brief conversation with you if organization B calls. I would love for you to focus on my project management or my ability to translate complicated things into first year student friendly language. If you know what to focus on, you're really well placed to be able to speak to that, but you don't want to unintentionally focus on something that isn't a feature of this new role. So you've sold them into a job that they're not going to be doing. What is the job? What would you like me to focus on? Is a great question for you. And what I recommend for students to do, they may not be brave enough to do it, is to ask their referees, particularly if it's the first time they've asked them and they're not sure. I would love for you to talk to my skill in. Are you comfortable to do that? What you can then say is, well, I haven't actually seen that. So I could talk about this or this, but not specifically that. You may need another referee to cover that gap. So if you know what to say, then it's much harder for you to say, what if I mess this up? So find out what the job is, find out what the skills are, and then have a conversation. Usually, referee questions will be, how long have they worked there? Essentially, they'll be asking you to verify the facts from the resume. Have they represented their skills and qualifications accurately? So, yes, that's a tick box. They are who they say they are. Then they'll ask, can you describe a situation? You know, how does this skill play out in your workplace. So we're really looking for somebody with high-level communication skills at executive level. Can you talk about this candidate's experience in that? So they'll guide you through. They will often ask you, what are the red flags? They won't frame it that way, but they will find a way to ask, what else should we know? And this is why they're referee phone calls rather than referee statements, because you're not going to document something negative. But you might say, well, they're fabulous in this environment, but when you put them in this environment, you get this. And again, if you know that that environment is not something that they're going to be using in their new workplace, that's a fine thing to say. Just say they're great in this, but they struggle in this because it's new to them. One thing that I would encourage you to do with HDR referees is to focus on the practicalities of what they've done. So instead of using, they worked with me on this, writing this article, again, you frame it in terms of projects. Every article you've ever co-written is a project. So what are they like in managing projects? You've got lots of evidence because every piece of research they've done is a project. Their HDR thesis is a project. But anytime they've conducted smaller projects, transdisciplinary activity is really strong. So find out what the warning flags might be and be open with your student about, I can't wait to sell your skills on this and this. I haven't actually seen much of this and this. Do you have someone else that you could use? Or is that something that we maybe need to find a way to work on together so that I can evidence it? You are right, Greg, that in academic circles, feedback can be pretty brutal. And it's brutal not because we're trying to squash people's confidence, it's so that we can build them up into the best that they can be. In industry, it is the opposite. So feedback is not robust unless you want them to receive I wouldn't hire them again if I had a choice. So unless that is the message you want them to hear, spend very little time on what they struggle with, unless it's from a progression perspective. When they first started with me, they were hesitant, they were unconfident, they really didn't engage professionally. I have seen them grow. And if they've asked you about red flags or those, what else should we know about? Speak to that and say they did start rough in this. They did find it hard to receive feedback, and I've seen them grow into a different kind of professional that I would thoroughly recommend. Does that help? Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
I have a bit of a question, if I may,
Sally.
Sally. Yeah, so I'm from the School of Biomedical Sciences, and biomed's not really a vocational career. So there's lots of different potential opportunities for their employment. I was really interested in your idea of chasing alumni, but obviously chasing almost 200,000 people is a bit of a handful. So I was wondering, are there metrics that QT has already collected to say this person did a biomed science degree and is now working in this field? So do we have access to that sort of information?
Not that easy, actually. They are projects that between grad and alumni and the GRC, we've actually tried to build a bit of a repository. It's actually quite complex. from a QT data perspective, generally speaking, because graduate outcome surveys are not really completed by PhDs. That's where that data would sit, which is why that LinkedIn alumni search can be really valuable. Shall we do one?
I just thought I'd actually mention as well, because I saw there are a couple of people from my school on,
Yeah.
that Kerry Manton, one of our leaders, teaching leaders, has actually tried to start up a LinkedIn page specifically for biomed alumni.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I just thought I'd say that, but I just wondered whether we could somehow connect with more people if we went through the QT alumni. But
sometimes is the answer to that.
yeah.
Grid also has a page. It's called the QUT Graduate Research Network. That's what it looks like. And so if you were a member of that, or you encouraged your student to be a member of that, what we post on there are shout outs for things that people have done amazingly, what current internship or job opportunities are available, but we'll also contact you into some of the alumni networks. What I might do is just show you, this is my profile. So to do the open to work, what students can do is, and you'll see that my profile doesn't have the green I'm unemployed banner, but they can come up with 5 job titles. They can choose their own of the kind of thing that they are looking for leads on. These are mine, quite specific to me, obviously. Your students would write something quite different, but encourage them to use terminology that creates different opportunities. They can then add their locations, the type of work. I recommend that they tick immediately, even if that is never the case. I'm not immediately looking for work. I do this so I can showcase it to students, but you never know. I actually do casual work, consulting work for 2 other organisations currently, and I did get found this way, so I haven't applied for those roles. And this is the difference between recruiter only and then the banner, which is all LinkedIn members. What that means is when recruiters go through that algorithm that finds potential candidates, they want to do that before they advertise roles. They want to tap in to resources that they don't know about. Their recruiting algorithms this way will come up with students. They prioritize people with the banner. So if they are at the end of their candidature and they are really desperately looking for work, I recommend the banner, but otherwise not. So to do the alumni search, you go on to the QUT homepage, companies. On QUT, this is what the homepage looks like. And click on alumni. Hopefully it works. As you see, about 200,000 alumni, not particularly helpful, but there are different ways of searching. You can search, hopefully you can see most of this at least. So that's too far. So you can search by title, by keyword, or by company. Often I will put PhD in there. You don't want students who are finishing their study in 2023. You want them from maybe finished in 2010, something like that. Now, you can specify where they work and you can add things. So, for example, Metro North or Boeing or Bain and Company, you can add organisations there. You can search by where they live. So this is Australia or international. You can search. Show more. Oh, it's over here. Got to find where the buttons do. So what they do, So, and again, those responses will be filtered basically often by my profile as much as the alumni. So, for example, if you're looking for research, there is research. If you wanted to look for what they do, it would be biomed. Here are what they are skilled at. So again, strategic planning, Microsoft Office. I don't know why that's there. I don't know anyone who would search on that. And again, you can add these skills. So if it's radiography, you would add that skill and then what they studied. So that's topics. And again, you can add them. So you can get quite prescriptive. And if we wrote PhD in biomedicine, this is an experiment, and we'll see what we get. So let's there you go. So we've gone from 200,000 to 12 people who finished their degrees in 2010 or earlier. It shows us where they're currently working. It shows us where they live. And here is the joy of it. It shows us who they are. So from here, for example, as you can see, I'm not directly connected with any of these people because it's not my field. But from here, let's have a look at Thomas. He studied at QUT. He's working as a senior research scientist. That's quite useful. He is in the skin cancer field. And you can now see he's working in Norway. That's pretty cool. You could do an informational interview with Thomas through LinkedIn. You don't even have to send a Zoom thing. From a message, you can set up a video meeting. Or you could ask him some question and answers. You can see what else he's done. So he studied at QUT, but he didn't do his PhD candidature there. That's okay though. You've got a reason to contact him. It's like I found you on a QUT alumni search. Your career history is fascinating. Would you mind if I had a 15-minute conversation with you? This is how you do it. When there's a reason to be contacted, people are really helpful in terms of wanting to know who they can talk to get different ideas. If Thomas is not particularly helpful, we keep searching. But that's how you find it. It was actually a really great example of how to go from 200,000 down to 12. Making direct contact with 12 potential people is not that scary compared to how do I find an alumnus that I want to talk to out of 200,000. It's intimidating. Another way you can do this is through an organization. So if you did want to work for Boeing, you can do the same search and say, I want to find people who work at Boeing. And again, then you can say QT, who went to QT or worked at QT. And here are, how many were there? 428. That's not particularly specific. If you then want to know in research or in one particular field, you can find out engineering intern, a senior systems engineer, aerospace professional, mechatronics. They've done an MBA. So they're in management. It's fascinating, right? So that's another way that you can use LinkedIn as a way to find people. There also are QT alumni chapters. Some are more active than others. You've got business school, young alumni, a faculty of health. These aren't specific to HDRs, but you've got law, you've got alumni in Europe, you've got executive women, people in Sydney, in North Asia. So there is a number of different searches that you can do on LinkedIn that could be quite helpful to get you started. I agree. I really, really want an internal database of career progressions from specific people. I'm doing my MPhil at the moment. Maybe that's something I'll end up doing for my PhD. Who knows? There's a need for it. There's a gap in the market, isn't there? Any other questions or comments? Or things that you struggle to answer, or things that you struggle to find the right resources for that you wanted to be able to share with your students? No. While you're thinking of others, I'll let you know that the upcoming workshops for supervisors that you might be interested in, Thursday, 12th of October, is on industry engagement. So how to support them into and through their internships. On 4th of September, it's how to support your HDRs to write critically. No one will go to that because no supervisor needs their student to do that. So never mind about that. Or wellness, responding to HDRs in tough times during their candidature. So there's 3 upcoming supervisor workshops that you may want to recommend to your colleagues, or you might want to also have a look at. While I have you, I'd really appreciate your feedback. So if you wanted to click on our QR code, I always forget the term, click on the QR code and send your feedback through. I'd really appreciate it. What I'm especially interested in at the moment is what resources or activities do you want to have access to that will help your students, or things that you can work on together with your students in terms of them constructing their career plan so that you feel that you've been helpful without feeling like we've thrown you a hospital pass and expected you to provide supports and resources that you're just not equipped or not time ready to be able to do.
Is there any other way we can get to the questionnaire other than the QR code?
Yes, there is.
Can you send us a link?
I can send you a link. I will send that in when I send you the slides and the reference for where students can engage with workshops. Yes, I will. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing. What we're trying to do is make these as targeted and relevant for the places that you need support, or that you've got the confidence to know, if I send students here, this is the best place for them to start their own research in those terms. Okay, well, I hope you found this useful. I hope that you found it productive in terms of where I can send you, what kind of conversations that you can have. And I'm really looking forward to having some feedback from some HDRs who've said, I just did an informational interview with my supervisor and I learned some amazing things, not just about you as a special supportive human, but about the way to do it, making them feel safe, to be able to engage in that is really, really important. Any further questions that I can help you with, I welcome those. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. I am very sorry that there was confusion on when this thing started, but I'm really glad that you all stayed and were patient with me to make sure that this was valuable.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks so much. It's great to see so many of you here. I hope that was useful, and I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next time. I'll
Thanks,
send you the
Karen.
resources shortly.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Karen, just a quick question.
Of course.
How do we make sure that we get credit for this? You know, I got an email saying my supervisory privileges had lapsed because I hadn't done any workshops for 2 years. And so I want to make sure that my privilege are reinstated.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you chose mine to come to. That is fabulous. I hope it was useful for you by marking your attendance off on this workshop. That is and that's my job. I'll mark your attendance, and that will go through the protocols, so you will be reinstated as job ready to go.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining and for staying. I hope it was useful.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for coming.
Okay, bye.